Wait, you're putting that inside me? The giant mail-order bride first froze, but the cowboy.
The wind carved long, lonely shapes across the prairie as the mail-order wagon creaked toward the ranch. Inside it, she sat hunched, trying to make herself smaller even though such a thing was impossible. Her knees pressed against the opposite bench despite her effort to fold them tight. Every bump in the road made her shoulders brush the low roof, and every time it happened, she flinched, reminded again that she did not fit the world built for ordinary women. The driver had barely spoken since dawn. He was used to delivering packages, cattle contracts, never a bride who stood nearly a head taller than him. He kept giving her little sideways glances, the kind men gave her all her life. Curious, startled, a touch uneasy. Her hands were clasped in her lap, fingers big enough to span most men's forearms. She had lived with the burden of size, strength, and the reputation others crafted around her. Too much woman, some whispered. Too big to marry, others said. And yet, when her widowed employer could no longer pay her wages, she had run out of choices. A letter from a lonely frontier cowboy had come like a strange, unexpected lifeline. He had written simply. Not flowery. Not demanding. Just a man with too much work, too much silence, and too much hope tucked into a stamped envelope. She had answered because the alternative was to be homeless in a world that had never made room for her. The wagon shuddered to a stop. The driver cleared his throat, nervous. Well, we're here. She ducked her head and stepped down, boots touching the dirt with a soft thud. Dust curled around her skirts. She rose slowly, her full height unfolding like a shadow stretching across the ranch yard, and then she saw him. He stood beside the corral, hat in hand, sunlight catching the faint silver at his temples, though he wasn't old. Lean, steady, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who'd spent his life working rather than talking. His dark eyes watched her without fear, without judgment, just quiet observation, the kind that saw things and held them gently. You made it. He said, voice low and warm. She swallowed hard. Yes, if he was shocked by her size, he didn't show it. He didn't blink, didn't shift uncomfortably. He didn't even seem to lean away. Instead, he stepped forward and offered his hand. She hesitated, then placed hers in his, feeling the fragile contrast of his calloused palm against her large, powerful fingers. He didn't flinch. He must be tired. Come inside. The wind's colder than it looks. She followed him toward the barn, where a lantern glowed through the slats. She expected clutter, dust, disarray. Instead, the place was startlingly clean. A quilt clearly new, edges still stiff from stitching, lay folded on a bench beside a steaming basin of water, soap, towels, even a wooden stool big enough for her to sit on comfortably. He must have built it himself. You did all this? She asked, surprised. He shrugged lightly. I wasn't sure what you might need after the trip. Figured best to prepare. Prepare. A word men rarely used in her presence. They expected her to adjust, to manage, to take up less space than she had, but he had prepared for her. She stepped into the warmth of the barn, letting the lantern's glow soften the ache in her chest. She flexed her hand, trying to hide the sharp pulse of pain shooting through her wrist. She had twisted it climbing out of the wagon earlier, but didn't want to draw attention to it on her first day. She didn't want to seem weak. Not in front of a husband she had never met, but he saw it anyway. You hurt your hand? She stiffened. No, I'm fine. He raised one brow slightly, not pressing but not believing either. Then he turned to his work table, where tools were laid out in neat, precise rows. She watched his hands, competent, sure as he picked up something wrapped in cloth. Her pulse quickened. The size of the bundle. The shape. Her mind leapt to places shaped by past experiences, men who saw her strength and assumed she could take whatever they gave. Whatever they demanded. When he turned toward her holding that object. The words tore out of her before she could stop them. Wait, you're putting that inside? Her whole body locked. Shoulders stiff. Throat tight. heart hammering so loud she could barely hear anything else. She felt the old fear creeping in, fear she thought she'd smothered during the long journey, but the cowboy froze too. Then, to her shock, he let out a startled laugh. Not mocking, not cruel, not anything like the harsh snickers she'd endured before. This laugh was soft, full of bewildered warmth, like he'd never in his life thought someone might misunderstand so drastically. No. No, he said quickly, lifting both hands. This ain't what you think. He set the cloth down gently and unwrapped it. Inside was not a tool of dominance or demand. It was a wooden splint, smooth, padded with cotton, carefully carved to shape a wrist. I made this for you, he said. You hurt yourself earlier? I saw how you held your arm. Figured you didn't want to mention it. She blinked. You made it? Since last night, he admitted. Didn't know if you'd actually need it, but... Well, better to be ready. Her throat tightened again, but for a different reason this time. Men had made things for her before, things heavy, things useful, things they wanted her to carry or lift. But no one had ever made something to help her. I ain't gonna hurt you, he said softly. And I sure ain't taking anything that ain't willingly given. I wanted to tend your injury. That's all. He approached her slowly, every step a question she could answer by stepping back. She didn't move. Couldn't, really? Something about his presence, steady, respectful, wrapped around her like a rope pulling tight in her chest. He took her hand gently. The way someone might hold a bird afraid to fly? His fingers were warm, his touch careful. He slid the splint beneath her wrist and wrapped it in cotton strips until her hand felt supported, steadied, almost weightless. When he tied the last knot. He looked up at her with quiet sincerity. There, he murmured. Better? She stared at him, hardly able to speak. She had arrived tense, wary, braced for demands. But instead, she found a man who prepared quilts, warm water, hand-carved splints, and space for her fear. And for the first time since she stepped onto that wagon miles away, something inside her began to thaw. Night settled over the ranch like a heavy blanket, thick and quiet, broken only by the distant call of a coyote. Inside the barn, the lantern's orange glow flickered gently across the wooden walls, casting soft shadows that danced along the hay bales and workbenches. She flexed her wrist carefully, surprised at how much steadier it felt inside the splint he crafted. The ache was still there, but muted, held firm by his quiet skill. He watched her without crowding, leaning one shoulder against the table. His arms were crossed in a relaxed way, not defensive, not impatient. He looked like a man who had spent years waiting for small things. The right rain, a good harvest, a stray calf returning home. Patience was carved into him as deeply as the weathered lines on his face. Feels better? He asked. She nodded, still embarrassed by how easily her fear had overtaken her. Yes, much. He tilted his head slightly, studying her not the way men studied her size or her strength, but the way someone might look at a wildfire from a distance, respecting the power, not fearing it. You don't have to hide pain around me, he said quietly. Or anything, really. Her breath shivered. She wasn't used to softness. Kindness was rarer than water where she came from. Men tended to speak with ownership or impatience or calculated charm. His gentleness felt foreign, almost dangerous in how much she wanted to believe it was real. You did all this for me, she murmured, glancing again at the quilt, the warmed basin, the stool he must have built from scratch. I don't understand why. He shrugged with a humble ease. You're my wife, or you're about to be... And even if you weren't, you're a person who traveled a long way, probably scared out of your mind. Least I can do is make things a little less rough. Most men wouldn't, she whispered. He didn't deny it. Didn't pretend to be better than others. He simply looked at her, steady, sincere. Most men don't know how to treat a woman they don't understand. Doesn't make it right. Asterisk, she sat down on the sturdy stool, the first seat she'd found in years that didn't creak beneath her weight. Her skirt brushed the dusty floorboards. The barn smelled of hay, leather, and faint wood shavings. Comforting smells. Real smells. Honest smells. Asterisk. He stepped closer, not suddenly, not boldly, just enough that the warmth of his presence touched her like a timid handshake. He looked down at the splint again, as though checking it a second time for her comfort. She noticed the small details, the way he checked the knots, the way he moved with surety, the way his fingers lingered only long enough to make sure she was secure. Asterisk. Why were you so afraid earlier? He asked softly, his voice careful, as if afraid to step on a bruise. Asterisk, she swallowed. Her throat tightened. Because men have seen my size and assumed I don't need gentleness or permission. They think I can handle anything they do to me? So when I saw that, she nodded toward the cloth he'd unwrapped earlier. My mind went somewhere it didn't need to. Asterisk, his jaw clenched with a slow, burning anger, an anger not at her, but at whatever had been done to her before. He lowered his voice. I'm sorry you were ever made to feel that way. Then, with even more resolve, you'll never feel it again here. Asterisk, her breath hitched. You say that so easily. Asterisk, he leaned back against the bench again, giving her more space. Because I don't take what ain't willingly offered. A home, a marriage, partnership's a choice. Every day. If you choose me tomorrow, I'll be grateful. If you choose me a month from now, even better. I'm not here to rush you. Asterisk, the idea shook her. A man willing to wait. A man willing to learn her pace. A man who didn't retreat from her size, her silence, her strength. Someone who seemed to see all the things she'd spent years hiding not as flaws but simply as pieces. Asterisk, outside. The wind whistled against the barn door. The horses shifted in their stalls, hooves tapping lightly on the packed earth. She had always been most comfortable with animals. They didn't judge. They didn't stare. They didn't make her feel monstrous. But this cowboy looked at her with the same steady assurance as a good horse. Grounded and calm. Asterisk. When you took my hand earlier, she said slowly, I thought you'd pull away when you felt how big it was. Asterisk, why would I? He asked, genuinely confused. Asterisk, because men usually do. Asterisk, he took one step closer, so slow she could have counted the seconds. Then he extended his hand again, not commanding, not claiming. Just offering. Asterisk, she stared at it for a long moment before placing her good hand into his palm. Her fingers enveloped his. She expected him to look surprised at the size difference, maybe startled, maybe secretly intimidated. But he didn't react at all. Not even a flicker. Asterisk, instead, he tightened his grip just slightly, enough to ground her. Enough to keep her from drifting away into worry. Doesn't bother me, he whispered. I've held reins thicker than this. Doesn't mean I control the horses. Just means I respect the strength. Asterisk, her eyes stung. She blinked hard. He didn't let go, not until she did. You said earlier, she murmured, that you've been alone a long time. Asterisk, he nodded. Most men out here have. But loneliness isn't the same as desperation. I didn't send for you because I needed someone to clean or cook or warm the place. I sent for you because life's quieter than it should be. A house this big shouldn't echo. Asterisk, and you don't mind that your bride is... Like me? Asterisk, he held her gaze. Tall? Strong? Built like someone who could pick me up if she wanted? No, I don't mind at all. Asterisk, her lips parted in surprise. You're not afraid? Asterisk, he shook his head. I'm not scared of someone who could stand beside me. Most folks want a partner who fits into the crook of their arm. I'd rather have one who can shoulder half the world with me. Her heart thumped so hard she felt it in her fingertips. Silence settled, thick and warm like a blanket. She could feel the tremor in her chest beginning to soften. The barn didn't feel foreign anymore. His presence didn't feel dangerous. Her own fear was loosening, thread by thread, leaving something unfamiliar in its place, something like hope. Asterisk, he knelt briefly to check the lantern, adjusting the wick so the light dimmed to a gentler glow. Then he stood again, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corner of his eyes, the soft stubble along his jaw, the weariness that came from years of working the land alone. We don't have to figure everything out tonight, he said. You're tired. I'm sure your mind's spinning. We'll take things slow. She breathed in deeply. Slow, she repeated, tasting the word. He nodded. At your pace, always. She didn't know why that made her chest ache. Maybe because no one had ever offered her a pace. No one had ever cared if she was scared or overwhelmed. She had spent her life adjusting to others, shrinking when asked, lifting more than needed, accepting whatever scraps of kindness fell her way. And here he was, offering choice, control, respect. She finally rose from the stool and stepped toward him, not boldly, not timidly, just enough that the space between them warmed. He didn't move, didn't lean in, didn't assume anything. He simply waited, the way the land waited for spring. For the first time since stepping off the wagon, she felt something she never thought she'd feel in a stranger's barn. She felt wanted, not for her labor, not for her size, not for the hardship she could endure, wanted for herself, and the cowboy didn't step back. Not to claim her, not to intimidate her, but to make sure she always knew where he stood, with her.